What a pleasure, what a treat to have you both here. I guess what I would love to do is just sort of start off with that refresher on what it is that we're talking about. One of the things that I found super fascinating in our preparatory discussions for this interview was that even though I think a lot of us think we understand what we mean by mindset, we don't necessarily all have a common understanding of what a mindset and mindset management might be. So how about that as an opening salvo to the two of you?
Sounds great. Thanks, Jeff. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I look forward to our conversation. So as Jeff said, we find it helpful to start with a quick activity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to go to the URL that I just pasted in the chat window. Just click on that. And there will be a quick question there that I would love for you to answer. And then we can look at responses and reflect on them. Let me know if anybody runs into any problem.
So we're taking a poll together, right, Eduardo?
Yeah, we're just going to answer a reflection question through a poll. And Leslie, I don't see a share screen button. I don't know if you can look into that, but if we can't share, that's okay. I can share some of the answers that we get.
Okay, I did make you host. Look at the bottom, just bring your arrow to the bottom bar. It doesn't say share screen. Isn't there an option? No? No,
it's okay. We don't, it's all right. We'll do without it. All right, let's see.
Is everybody able to navigate to the URL and see the answer or the question button? Are you getting?
So we have a lot of answers here. So for example, we're seeing curiosity or an openness to learning new information and ideas, openness to new experience, curiosity, ability to be open-minded and shift negative thinking, being willing and open to trying new ways to do something, presence of mind, as well as our approach to the world. So we find that growth mindset is a term that is really easy, and Carol Dweck has talked about this a lot, is really easy to distort it into something else that we already believe. So another example here is, it says being wrong is a learning experience, not a failure. And what growth mindset is a perspective about the nature of human beings. Is when we see human abilities or qualities as changeable, as malleable. So often, for example, when we think about growth mindset as being open-minded, that doesn't quite get to it. Or if we think about growth mindset being about being comfortable with mistakes or being adaptable, that doesn't necessarily get to the fact that humans can change, that we can improve. And what the growth mindset research shows is that when we see ourselves and other people as able to change and improve, change ourselves, not just what we do, then there's a lot of kind of psychological benefits that come from that. So a growth mindset is the understanding or the belief that our human abilities and qualities can change. And we usually have that view of certain abilities and qualities, and a fixed mindset about other abilities and qualities. Like, for example, I think that my height is pretty fixed as an adult. So that's a fixed mindset about height. I might have a fixed mindset about certain things and a growth mindset about other things. And when we have a fixed mindset about some things, or we are in a growth mindset about some things, that usually leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we don't improve, sometimes the reason is that we're in a fixed mindset and we can't improve, and sometimes that belief is not grounded on kind of good science and practice. So I just wanted to do a quick activity to get us all on the same page, and I think we can get into a conversation.
Fantastic. So this idea has been compelling enough for the two of you to commit your lives to it. How did you both arrive at growth mindset as being the thing that you wanted to focus on.
Lisa, do you want to take that since you got started earlier than I did, and then I can jump in?
Sure. I did not start out with a growth mindset. And I think when I was introduced to the original academic concept, really early in the research, it struck me how much my perspective had been informed by having a fixed mindset in certain realms. And I was inspired by the fact that it created this potential not only for actual change, because you have to believe you can change to really do the work and so forth, but for an emotional liberation from certain kinds of fear and anxiety about proving oneself and measuring up and all of that. And it was exciting, and it was really exciting when we started doing research in real world environments and seeing how it impacted young people in particular in school, and just seeing the real impacts of it. So I just think it has enormous potential, and my personal experience of working in this realm for, it's scary to say, but about 30 years now, is realizing that it's been a journey. It's a lifelong journey. You don't get a growth mindset and you're done. It's a lifelong journey and project, and it informs every single aspect of life. So it's the gift that keeps on giving, and you never actually reach the destination. You're just on the path.
Almost like a practice, right?
It is. Everyone has to practice it. You get nothing from it if you don't practice it. Just learning the words gets you nowhere. And you have to do some emotional self-reflection about how you think about yourself and how you treat others, and really in an ongoing way. So I'm inspired by the fact that it keeps always yielding new insights, as well as seeing the benefits in other people in the world.
And to situate everyone, you were actually part of the research team with Carol Dweck, right? That actually came up with this idea.
Yeah, well, while I was working with Carol, initially as a student, then as a postdoc and a research scientist at Columbia University before she came to Stanford, I was sort of in on the ground floor of that and was involved in some of the foundational research, particularly applied in the schools. Mm-hmm. And while I was working with her there, she started writing Mindset, the book, and working with an advisor came up with a term that was much friendlier than entity and incremental theory, which was the original academies for growth and fixed mindsets, or fixed and growth mindsets. So yeah, I saw the evolution from a fairly narrow academic context to a more real world context in the research in schools, to an actual, kind of public sharing of this information, and then all of the learning and growth that's happened since then. And it's been really exciting to see.
Wow. Eduardo, how does a Venezuelan financier, engineer end up changing the world mindset?
Yeah, so I grew up in Venezuela, as you said, where you also grew up, Jeff. Mm-hmm. And it was, looking back, I had a lot of kind of fixed mindset environment and culture around me. There was a strong pressure to conform to a social norm, to be a certain way, to wear certain kinds of clothes, to talk in a certain way. And I just thought the world was like that, but I wasn't particularly happy in it. And unexpectedly, my family ended up moving to the United States. I finished high school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, junior and senior year. And I was, as you say, I was doing the things that I thought I was supposed to do. I studied chemical engineering and finance, not because I was passionate about them, but because I thought that would open up opportunities. And I think I was focused on, if you've read Chip's book, Peak, which was very influential for me, I was focused on the bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy, right? On safety, security, making sure that I was going to be able to take care of myself and my family going forward. I was going to have a job. If there's a recession, I wasn't going to get fired. And I did those things. So I went to work in investment banking in Wall Street, and then in venture capital in Silicon Valley. And after a few years doing that, and going after kind of the success that society defines, right? The success of that, what people think is successful. After I kind of got enough safety and security at the bottom of the hierarchy, I got into a midlife crisis. I got physically sick. I got emotionally sick because I was living well below my means, which I still do. And so I didn't need more financial stuff to get a fancy car and get a fancy house. But then there was nothing left, no purpose, no meaning in what I did. And I was left in a dark place that felt like a tempest to me at the time. And so I realized I had to focus on my health first and figure out how to find meaning in my life. My wife had become a teacher in East Palo Alto, which is an underprivileged area in the Bay Area. And so I learned about what purposeful work can be. And I went to grad school to find interested in social entrepreneurship. And I met Carol. I was introduced to her and to Lisa. And I read Carol's book, and it really resonated with me. I could, as Lisa said, I could understand a lot of my history from a fixed and growth mindset perspective when I was trying to prove myself and not focus on my own growth and how that was working against me. And so because it was really powerful for me and how I was getting in my way, in my own way in my past, and how I could think differently to be more successful as life, successful meaning pursuing happiness, fulfillment and appreciation. And I got clarity about what's important to me in my life and how to go about it. So then I partnered with Lisa and Carol to bring this work out to the world, and that's what we've been doing for the last 13 years.
And you guys work with school districts, with all kinds of agencies, but you also work with businesses, right, to help them sort of shift team mindsets, individual mindsets. Is that correct?
Yeah, I personally, I focus most of my work with businesses the last couple of years, and we have a lot of colleagues that have an education background that are better positioned to support educators, but I do that work as well. But with businesses, often there's a lot of pressure to perform, right? To avoid mistakes all the time. And there's the sense that the fewer mistakes we make, the more flawless we are all the time, the better. But that leads to stagnation. That doesn't lead to risk-taking, to experimentation, to soliciting feedback, to vulnerability. So we help businesses think about what does it take to have psychological safety so that people can learn with each other, support each other, be more innovative, and be more invested in continuous improvement. What does that mean for how people lead? What does that mean for the culture and systems to make that happen?
Your work, the two of you, your work has this really compelling divide. For me, I found it a really interesting nuance that I'd never really understood, was the difference between this learning zone, as you call it, and the performance zone. Could one of you kind of help us understand the difference between those two and how we might sort of see that in our own world and lives?
Yeah, so sometimes people in companies, for example, have the sense that in order to improve, we just have to work hard. And in fact, when we sometimes ask what does growth mindset mean, one of the answers that sometimes people give is, it means working hard. And if we just work hard, then we'll get better. Right. But sometimes we're not clear that hard work comes in different forms. Sometimes hard work is oriented toward performing and doing the best we can, focusing on what we know and minimizing mistakes. And sometimes hard work is focused on improvement, on doing the things we haven't done before, experimenting, trying new things. And being clear about in which ways am I trying to perform and in which ways am I trying to get better and innovate is helpful, because it gives us first, like, we can align with our colleagues. Like, for example, if we have teammates and we're going into an important client meeting and we're saying, this is a really high stakes situation, we want to play it safe, we don't want to try new things in this meeting, that's fine. We just want to align on that, right? Or in this other meeting, we're going to try something new we haven't done before. Like, those are very different approaches to that meeting. And so being able to align with ourselves and with others helps us be better at both performing and improvement. Lisa, do you want to? And so you can do analogies like, you know, in sports, if you're in a very important championship final, you want to do the best that you can, what you have, you know, works. Try to minimize mistakes, but then where you struggle, you might go to your coach and say, Coach, I struggled with this particular move, let's practice that. Whereas you might avoid that move in the match. And that's a very different type of activity that you do in the match versus in practice. Lisa, do you have anything to add to that? You're on mute.
All right. In everyday practice, we use it all of the time as a concept to remind ourselves when we're doing something new and we're stretching, that it's okay that we make mistakes, that we're not judging ourselves or others. It's so useful because it's so easy to fall back on that default, which we've learned earlier in life, that we have to always perform well. And when we don't, we feel it as a loss of some kind. And by reminding ourselves, you know what, we're together in the learning zone. We know we're going to make mistakes, and it's okay because we're doing something new and we're stretching. It's very liberating, and it creates a better camaraderie where people are not preoccupied with their ego and how they appear, but rather willing to be really open about admitting mistakes that they make, recognizing them, accepting feedback, and so forth. And then forgiving themselves and others for what we do badly, even sometimes, because we always know we're going to be learning from it and getting better at that activity. So it's it's a practice again, you know, something that we use ourselves within our company on a frequent basis to give ourselves permission to be learners.
Lisa, I actually, while I have you, you mentioned at the top of the interview that this research came from your work with Carol around children and changing children's mindsets or understanding their incoming mindsets and how you might work with them to shift those mindsets and even appreciation of those mindsets. As your work has progressed into the world of adults, we're faced with this sort of social mythology, right? Which is like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Is it as applicable to adults? Are adults as able to shift their mindsets as kids? And is there data to support that?
That's a really interesting and complex question. Yes and no. Yes, in that they're certainly able to do so if they wish to do so. And in some ways, better able to do so because adults better understand how to do deliberate reflection and practice and can be more independent of their social context. We also have access to so many resources as adults that we can learn from. But on the other hand, many adults have, because they see themselves as already having been formed, are more reluctant to challenge their assumptions and to change. And in that sense, it can be more difficult, especially for older people, because we have so many stereotypes about what it means to be older, not only including that you can't learn new things, but that you can't change. And change of the self, of our mindsets, of our attitudes about ourselves and others is at the core. And so the capacity certainly is there. It's more about the willingness and the readiness to do so. But in young people, they're very much at the mercy of their environment. So the first thing we learned was that you couldn't just change adolescents' mindset. You had to work with the teachers, because the teachers, all the adults in the building, were creating a context that was continually, forming the students' mindsets. And that led us to the world of adults. And that's actually the most challenging domain, but also the one that has so much promise now, since we're creating the world that they're inheriting.
And then can I bit back to Eduardo, in terms of these sort of learning zones or creating these spaces for learning so that we can start to practice in a slightly safer environment, like Lisa's suggesting. What have you started to see in your work in that area?
Well, so first, a comment that ties into what Lisa just said about kids versus adults. We see a similar pattern in companies where the new employees, so if you ask all the employees, all the staff of the company about how safe they are or they feel to be vulnerable in front of others and to basically behave like learners, like ask for feedback, for example, the people who feel least safe are those in the middle of the organization. So the ones that are joining the organization feel safe because it's expected that they're going to be learning a lot. And the people at the top feel relatively safe because they have a lot of seniority and they're protected, even if they're not exhibiting a lot of those behaviors. And it's the people in the middle of the organization that often feel like they don't feel as safe. But organizations can create an environment where the people with highest social status are those who are the most effective learners, who are modeling those learning behaviors, who are curious, who are asking questions, who are experimenting and sharing the results of those experiments, who are talking about what they want to improve and asking for people's feedback along the way to support their progress, who are talking about their mistakes and what they've learned from their mistakes, right? And so it takes, sometimes we think about confidence as something that means that you are sure that you are right. But in a growth mindset for us, confidence is confidence that you're doing what makes the most sense to grow the most and to perform the most in the long term. And that doesn't mean that you're sure that you're right. It means that you might be wrong and that you're confident enough to be vulnerable in front of others. And so I think that there are organizations that are doing a great job at that, right? When they onboard people, saying learning and improvement is really important here. And these are the things that we do in order to do that on a daily basis.
I've got sort of two strands of questions that I want to ask, and I can't work out which one to go for first, but let's stay on this theme. I think what I'd love to explore a little bit is, you reference this idea of the performance zone being somewhere where you have to be on point. You're doing your job, you're being your adult, you're doing your thing, okay? And then this sort of learning zone, you're allowed to fail, you're allowed to drop the ball, you're allowed to have that sort of vulnerability. And that as an adult, whether it's at work or at home, those are sometimes two very different environments. How do you recognize those environments? How do you create those environments?
Lisa, do you want to comment on that, or you want me to?
I think for me, even the performance zone can also be a learning zone, because I always have two lenses on a situation. Let's make the most of it and do the best that we can and try. And let's also keep our minds open to the possibility that we learn a great deal from trying and even failing in that context. So there are certainly higher stakes situations where you really hope you don't fail, but it's never the case that there's no learning to be had in my experience. But I do think that when there's something material at stake that's important to you, starting out with an intention and being explicit about it, we're going to do the very best we can, but also allowing for the fact that success is never guaranteed, and that whatever the result is does not reflect upon your innate ability, your value, your capacity. It's simply a feedback on the performance that you did is always still important. That's the application of the growth mindset even into the performance zone. It's really important.
Yeah, to build on that, so I think I totally agree, and I say that in the performance zone, we will never be perfect. In a growth mindset, perfection doesn't exist, because if we can always improve, it means that we can't ever be perfect. But so we are humans, and even if we're trying our best, we can always reflect and further improve. Also, sometimes we kind of blend the performance and the learning zone together. Like, for example, if I am doing a presentation, I might, it's high stakes, I might do the best I can, but I might work on a specific thing, like looking at people in the eye or something like that. So I'll be working on a specific thing, even though I'm trying to do a good job overall. But for me, the learning zone strategies, the most powerful ones and easiest to sustain, I think, come down to habits and systems and structures. So, for example, there's a concept that I deem to be really important that I call STEM habits. And STEM habits are habits that are stable, that don't change, that enable other habits to form. So for example, when I first turn on my computer every morning, I open up a document that has some reminders to myself. It has my strategic objectives, but it also has reminders on what new habits I'm trying to form. So that means that I'm always working on a new habit, and I have a way to remind myself of what that is every morning. And so when the new habits become automatic, then I switch the habit in the document, and I'm just always working on a new habit, right? Or we can use our calendar for reflections, every week or every day, or our commute back from work, or certain things that we want to be thinking about, what went well, what didn't go well today, what I'm going to do differently next time. Or that can happen with our teammates on a regular basis. And so what are the kind of habits and systems and structures and tools that can enable us to spend time in the learning zone? Another example is when I see an article or a video that I want to read or watch, I don't read or watch it at that point, but I put it in a queue that is prioritized. And so when I have lunch, I often watch videos that I want to watch. I just open up that list and I start at the top, and I learn that way when I'm having lunch. Or for the articles, I use an app called Pocket, which can read the articles back to me. So if I'm walking the dog or going for a run, I can listen to a podcast or an audiobook or read an article. So what are kind of those things that we do on a regular basis that can help us continue to learn?
What's the role of the mentor in that learning zone?
Of the mentor?
Mm.
I think it can be different roles. Lisa, do you want to comment on that, or you want me to?
Go and I'll follow
Yeah.
up.
So I think mentors or coaches can take on different roles depending on what you're trying to improve. In certain areas, coaches are experts on how to improve at a very specific thing, and they can guide you on what to practice or how to practice it. So if you're thinking about, certain sports or certain classical music instruments or singing and ballet, domains where there's a lot of knowledge about how to get better at something, and there are domains where performance is very objectively measured. Like leadership, for example, is something that is not very objectively measured. Like who's a better leader than somebody else, and how you become a better leader is something that a lot of people have a lot of different perspectives on. And so the role of a coach in a situation like a leader versus a situation like tennis is different. And so in other situations, coaches can be more asking questions, helping the person reflect, right? Think and kind of help us gain the answers from within ourselves and kind of reflect and make connections. So those are some thoughts that come to mind. What do you think, Lisa?
I think that as a mentor, it's very important to practice a growth mindset and model a growth mindset, and to encourage reflection in your mentee about the ways in which they're helping themselves or not by applying a growth mindset to what they're doing. I had one member of our team who had an epiphany, which I actually thought it was funny because I thought it was something I assumed that was known, but at one point I was giving some tough feedback, but in a friendly way, and she took it very well, but she said, something that reflected to me that she was feeling, it was reflecting on her and her capacity and her ability. And I said something to the effect, she says, of it's not about you, it's about the work. And she actually has repeated that many times to others as being a moment when she had a real epiphany. Mm. And, so I think we need to model that when we mentor someone. I'm not judging you, this is not about, seeing that yourself as being competent, not competent. It's about really becoming empowered to do the very best work that you can do. So, but then there's also that personal growth side to things, in that by teaching, you can teach people a growth mindset by modeling it and exemplifying it, and you know, that can then become part of their vocabulary, their emotional vocabulary about themselves, as opposed to preaching about it or, you know, teaching it academically. I think that's a powerful role for a mentor.
So we've talked a lot about individuals and individual mindsets. And so, you know, what I'm hearing is there's this kind of learning zone where you get to create conditions to fail. And there's this performance zone where culturally you can even spread that into that performance zone, you know, where you can be more vulnerable and so on. But a lot of that is about how am I doing? What am I doing? We've touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to sort of explore with you guys. In a company, there's a culture that is telling you how you should be and how you should be doing. And that's your system, let's say. You're in a business, that's your system. And then we're in a sort of a world which has a sort of a super system, right? You're getting messages about your gender, or you're getting messages about your race, or whatever it happens to be. And so you're managing your own mindsets, you're managing your cultural mindsets, and you're managing your sort of super system mindsets. How do you do that? How do you pass between those sort of three levels? And then is there a difference between managing what's going on with me and managing what's going on in those two other systems?
Yeah, I would say very much so. Yeah, if you're familiar with the work of Amy Edmondson on psychological safety and how the work environment can foster what is essentially a growth orientation by fostering psychological safety, that one can be open and honest with feedback and facts, that whether or not they're flattering to others. So that's a culture, it's a practice, a personal practice that creates culture, especially from the leadership lens. What happens when someone gives you unwelcome news or gives you some critical feedback? How do you handle it? And if you handle it in a way that makes them feel psychologically safe, that can become an organizational practice that then frees people to have a growth mindset, not only about themselves, but about the company as a whole.
Yeah. And then with that super system, I mean, it's so hard to impact that or to choose that, right? You're born into it.
Yeah, so, sorry, Lisa, were you going to say something?
No, I just wasn't sure I caught the meaning of that, but go ahead, Ed.
I think, are you talking about also the society, like the media and everything in the culture? Yeah.
Right.
So I think, so Pat Whitty in the chat window wrote, how do you coach someone to examine their mindset and be willing to go through the pain of changing it? And I think, so this is at the individual level is the question, but whether it's at the individual level or at the team organizational level, and we can talk about society also. But I think it starts with awareness of just being able to see the effects, see how we're thinking, or see what's happening and see the effects of that. So I think we encourage people to start with our own selves and start with our own self-awareness and self-understanding. And so, for example, for me, when I'm working on trying to become more aware of something, like, for example, my fixed mindset, right? I think that's a wonderful thing to do early on in this work, is to work on being able to catch ourselves when we're in a fixed mindset and notice how it's affecting us real time. So that as we're going in the day, we're having a conversation, I say something, and I realize, oh, that was fixed mindset. Like I realized at that moment that I'm in a fixed mindset. That's a really valuable thing to do and a foundational in this work. But it's really hard to get there. But if I'm going to work on that, if I want to get to that point, then what I would do is I have that STEM habit, like where first thing in the morning I remind myself of what I'm working on, right? So I remind myself, I want to be able to catch myself of when I'm in a fixed mindset, and that's what I'm working on until I get there. And so once we are able to catch ourselves, okay, I'm in a fixed mindset and that's preventing me from better listening or from asking questions, then we become aware that our thinking is getting in the way of our goals, right? And it's getting in the way of our relationships. And that's an important step to then be able to say, okay, I want to change, right? I want to change because I see how it's not working for me. The same thing happens in an organization. When we do work with leaders, you know, they're doing the best they can to help their organizations, and they're encouraging everybody to work hard. They might be encouraging everybody to be flawless and to avoid mistakes always, and they're not seeing how that's getting in the way of innovation and continuous improvement. So becoming aware of how what we're doing, what effects it's having, is a really important step, you know, early on. I think that when you talk about the broader society of culture, the media, and all of that, what often happens is that there's a lot of fixed messages. There's growth mindset messages and there's fixed mindset messages that we hear throughout our lives. And what often happens is that early on, we develop a perspective about the nature of human qualities and abilities. Some abilities are fixed, some are malleable. And then we notice what confirms our beliefs, right? And we kind of discard what doesn't confirm our beliefs. So we don't change our beliefs because we're not realizing kind of what we're not questioning our beliefs, right? So what we can do is reflect and frame the world around us so that we can explain it in a growth-minded way. Like, for example, somebody said that schools are a place that have a lot of fixed mindset structures, but and there are things that we can control as a teacher in a classroom or as a principal in a school that we can change, but there are things that we can't change. But what we can do is we can frame things in a growth-minded way so that people make sense of those structures that are fixed or that tend to be fixed in a way that supports a growth mindset.
So again, just to sort of play back a possible thing that I heard, you have to notice your own fixed mindsets as you're working through life and have these STEM habits, which are these kind of daily practices or weekly practices that allow you to address those mindsets and process them. But also you have to be able to start to recognize where you're receiving fixed messages as right versus growth messages. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely. Really... becoming more aware, I think, is critical. I agree.
Wow. Okay.
And it takes work, right? It takes work to get there, but the more we work on it, the more this becomes automatic, and then we can become more aware of what's happening and how what people say is affecting us. And then that's kind of like a vaccine. It inoculates us against those messages because we see what's happening as it's happening.
Right. John Warner was asking about this idea that that selflessness and fixed mindset, selfishness and fixed mindset are somehow related. What's the role of service in a growth mindset?
Lisa, you want to take that? Or you want me to?
Well, I just would say that it is so rewarding to help people grow as opposed to being in a position of evaluating and judging people, that when you practice growth mindset in that mentee relationship or in a leadership relationship, it's more fulfilling by far than when you're practicing more fixed mindset thinking. And so, you know, it's its own reward, and therefore it's self-reinforcing in my own experience and that of others I've known.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would add that, so in our work, we place growth mindset as within a motivational framework as part of other mindsets that lead people to be motivated and effective learners. And one of those mindsets is the belief that what we're doing is meaningful or valuable or relevant. So just because we're in a growth mindset is not going to make us want to do something or get better at that thing. We also have to believe that that thing is worth putting improvement-oriented work towards. So that's one connection. Another connection that I wanted to mention is that sometimes when we are struggling with something, we are trying to do something and we're failing, and we try again and we fail again, one thing that we can do is change our strategy to try to improve at that thing. We often try to keep doing the same thing that's not working, but we need to change what it is. But something else that we can do if we're struggling and not finding a way to improve is ask why. Why am I trying to do this in my life? And when we ask why, it leads us to a higher level goal, right? And then we ask why again, and why, and why, and why. And then we can get to the highest level goal for each of us, which for me, when I ask why, a lot of times I get to happiness, fulfillment, and appreciation. So when we ask a lot of what, first we want to be most resilient and most growth-minded about the highest level goals. And sometimes we want to give up and not be resilient on the low level goals in service of the high level goals. But I think that when we ask why, we often get to the insight that serving others and contributing to other people's lives improves our lives and is a very rich and interesting way to live. And so when we try to get better at living, so a growth mindset about living better, I think we get to a connection to contribution and service through getting better at living.
I would just add one thing. There's a great comment in the chat, if I may, from John Warner, saying that delving into the mindset work at the Arbinger Institute, where they usefully suggest that growth mindset is heavily correlated with external selflessness and fixed mindset with self-centeredness, and asks what are our feelings about this thinking. And it reminds me of the fact that in a fixed mindset, one is generally in a self-protective mode, always on guard for risks and threats. And that focuses one on oneself, a la the, this is about me, not about the work mindset. When in a growth mindset, because it creates a sense of liberation from that fear, and rather a positive aspiration for growth, it positions you to be less focused on the self in general, less focused on whether or not you're succeeding and winning and your competitive, needs in relation to others, and thus freer to be altruistic.
That is a fantastic place to pause. I just want to sort of reflect back to you both that you set up the Academy with people receiving a certificate in mindset management at the end of their week. So the work that you've done, the work that you're both doing is absolutely seminal to the work that we're doing. It's really impacted the way that we think about aging and how we might impact aging. I want to invite Chip onto the line. I know that you're out there somewhere, Chip.
I am here. Oh my God. Well, I'm not ready for prime time.
You always are.
Okay. Hi. Actually, a couple of an MEA alum, Ingrid Summerfield, just arrived. She and her husband are staying for 4 nights, so I'm going to have to go in a moment. But go for it. What can I do?
What I wanted to ask you was, what are your thoughts on this in terms of the growth mindset? Are there questions that you have now that we have the kind of the progenitors of some of this thinking on the line?
Isn't it nice when Jeff uses big words? The progenitors. So I'm going to have a growth mindset to catch up with you. Well, first of all, Eduardo and Lisa, thank you for joining us. When Jeff just said a moment ago that they get a certificate in mindset management, I immediately thought, oh my God, I'm going to get a letter from the Stanford legal department. But I just want to say that what's fascinating about this is the depth of the subject and how it is so, the thing that I've said from a long time ago before I really understood this very well was it's like the fish didn't really understand the water was there because it was so pervasive to its full life. Oh, she likes that. Good, Lisa. All right. Yeah, and I think that's the part that it just, I'm not sure I have a question, other just an observation. I've really enjoyed being in the background listening because I think that the idea, how do we help people? If we're helping students and younger people learn about mindset, how do we help people throughout their full life understand it exists, that water is real, and it's really important that you actually clean out your aquarium occasionally, otherwise it gets really murky. And so I don't really have much to say other than that. And thank you, Eduardo and Lisa. And I just hope some other alums get to ask some questions that can be answered. So I'm going to give my time to someone else.
Beautiful.
I love that application of that metaphor.
Others
Me too, and I would just say, and thank you, Chip, and as you know, your work has been really influential to me personally, so thank you for all you do and all you're doing. And I would just add that we're all learners here. Like, you know, Carol is learning about mindset too, and we're all in this journey together. It's great to be connecting with all of you, and I look forward, you know, I hope that we get a chance to collaborate going forward as well.
Eduardo, we have a question from Kathleen around, are there companies that have built good culture around mindset, you know, that have created, I think Lisa, you sort of shared the idea of creating psychological safety within the culture so that people can both learn and perform. Is there anyone you could point us to that you're like, wow, they did an amazing job?
Yeah,
it's best situated to answer that with the respect to the organizations, I think.
Yeah, so I think that there are examples, and it's interesting that different companies go about it in a very different way, and they have different cultures and systems that get to a culture of innovation and continuous improvement through different solutions. Like, for example, the largest hedge fund in the world is called Bridgewater Associates, and it is a culture of ruthless learning almost. You know, everybody's like so open and honest with each other, of giving each other feedback right then and there in front of the whole company. And only like a third of the people who join survive it because they don't want to be that vulnerable with each other, right? They're very, very direct. Or there are other companies that do it in different ways. My favorite company that does amazing things is called Clear Choice Dental Implants, and it is the leader. They have a 50% market share on a certain type of the most complicated dental implants procedures, and they have a chain of these centers, and they do so many things that are learning oriented. Like, for example, I don't know how they do this, but they get most of their customers to sign something that says that they can be videotaped in all the conversations and in all the rooms, both from the sales and like the procedures and everything. And each person who serves them can watch the videos to reflect on what they could do better. They can ask other people for feedback. They have systems that make it easy to do that. But the videos can only be used in a formative way to give constructive feedback, not in an evaluative way. They have created these really cool games where, for example, the salespeople kind of do these games where there's a card that has a situation. The customer says this, what will you say in return? And so the people around the table have different ideas on what they could respond. And somebody kind of, the person with the card picks the answer they like best, and they kind of play in a fun way in terms of continuing to improve. Or they have lots of things. They have simulation rooms where they can role play and get feedback from each other. So there are definitely some great companies that are doing learning oriented work for sure.
Can we go to the room? Is there anyone else that has questions that they want to ask? Leslie, I've got you up first.
Hi, Eduardo and Lisa, thank you. So I just wanted to tell you, I just learned about this growth mindset just in the last 2 months. And I signed up for a Spanish class online through our community college. And it was actually part of the curriculum in our textbook, which I thought was really cool. And so there's a way that it's reaching thousands and thousands of students where they're starting you out when you're learning a language saying, oh, here's the mindset, and it sets you up so that you thought that you knew that you could be successful if you weren't sabotaging yourself. So there's a really broad way that it's being used. And so then I guess I just wondered about the negative voice. So, you know, if you're in the positive or you're in the growth mindset and you're going, okay, by the way, I got an A+, you know, so maybe it worked. But, you know, still there are moments when you're in that growth mindset, and then those little voices in the back say, oh, you know, they kind of trip you up. So I wonder how you deal with that. Thank you. Gracias.
Carol has a practice she discusses in some of her writings where she names her fixed mindset. And whenever, and one of the things she said is that you want to recognize that that person has your best interests at heart. They mean well. That fixed mindset entity is actually trying to help you. They're just really misguided about the best way to do it. And so if you name that fixed mindset and then argue with it when it is giving you those negative messages, she finds that very helpful, which I think is really cool.
You almost personify it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's an example of self-talk, and so we call that the fixed mindset persona, and it's a fun way to say, hey, you know, Diego just came in here and is, you know, I'm in the Diego persona right now, right? And so I can see what's happening. It creates a little bit of distance so that I don't take it as personally. And when I can tell my colleagues, hey, or when I can tell a colleague, hey, you know, did Katie just arrive? Is that Katie talking? Like it creates a little bit of distance so we can talk in a fun way about what is happening. And that's one way. But other ways are just kind of self-talk of, hey, you know, what's happening right now? Is this really fair? You know, what can I do differently? Because sometimes, for example, what is happening that is getting us into that fixed mindset thinking can be, for example, when we compare ourselves to other people. And often we see people who are much more advanced, who've been doing this work for a lot longer, and we didn't see their process to improve. And all of a sudden we feel less capable, and it's putting us in a fixed mindset. So we can remind ourselves, hey, you know, they've been at it for a long time. I'm in this process, I can get better. And if we can go back to I can get better, as opposed to here's my comparison of me to somebody else, it can help us get into a growth mindset. So strategies like that in terms of how we talk with ourselves.
Yeah. I want to finish. A couple of people, most recently, Laurie Schwambeck, have asked, how do you keep a growth mindset in the face of stress? So, for instance, right now in a time of COVID, I know for myself, Bob Waxman in a couple of talks back was talking about that kind of cycle where you're up and you're down in this time. How do you manage your mindset in such a stressful time?
Of course, this is when we need it the most, right? Because we have to remain flexible, we have to remain adaptable, and to be able to let go of our preconceptions about who we are and what role we play in the world is a key to being adaptable. But it is true, and it goes back to what Ed said about the hierarchy of needs, that when you're under a great deal of stress and threat, you start focusing on how do I just maintain safety? How do I maintain sufficient resources to keep going? And so that is a stress on the kind of thinking that enables you to take risks, because you're really not in a risk-taking mode. I think the thing we can recognize is that life is change and life is risk, and that safety in some sense, in the purely physical or economic sense, is an illusion. And in some sense, we have to accept that and ride that wave. It's not easy. But having that growth mindset will make you much better able to ride that wave. And we're not going to have a choice. Pandemic aside, just life does that to you. Aging, changing circumstances, family issues, anything can do that to you.
And I would add that first, there are what we call fixed mindset triggers, which are the things that tend to put us into a fixed mindset. So stress is an example of that. Receiving feedback might be another example, or seeing somebody who's really good at something might be another example. So becoming acquainted with what those fixed mindset triggers is helpful. Knowing that stress puts us in that place, right? And then what we can do, like if we're in a stressful place, I might breathe deeply, right? Or I might reframe my emotions to mean something else. But the other thing I'd like to mention is, when Chip was the CEO of Joie de Vivre and he was going through a really tough time, it felt like a tempest. It felt like the worst thing that could happen to him, I think. A lot of really great things came out of that, right? This wouldn't happen. This wouldn't be a reality right here, this group of people coming together, if Chip hadn't gone through those tough times. And I think that when we go through tough times, I remind myself that it might feel like a really, really hard time, but that it is also an opportunity that can get me to a better place, because I've also lived that. And I think that's also helpful in these times of crisis.